Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a question
Mm.
that's been sparking some serious debate lately.
Okay.
Should there be mandatory retirement ages for U.S. politicians?
Mm.
For those in the House, the Senate,
Right.
even Supreme Court justices.
It's a topic that's definitely been getting more attention recently, I think,
Yeah,
especially with some of the concerns around the health and cognitive abilities of some of our senior leaders.
absolutely. And you've brought a fascinating collection of opinions from Reddit users today, where
Yes.
people are really going head to head on both sides of this issue.
It's a fascinating mix
Yeah.
of perspectives for sure.
So our mission today
Yes.
is to kind of explore those viewpoints,
Okay.
pull out the key arguments for and against these age limits,
Yes.
and even delve into some alternative solutions that have been proposed.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. What are some of the most compelling arguments people are making in favor of these age limits?
Well, one of the primary concerns that we see is the potential for, age-related cognitive decline.
Mm-hmm.
Users pointed to figures like Dianne Feinstein
Right.
and Chuck Grassley as examples.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here, I think, is that this concern goes beyond just these individual cases.
Right.
It really raises the question of how do we, as a society, ensure that all of our leaders are mentally fit to serve, regardless of age?
Absolutely. And those are the names that really sparked a lot of conversation on Reddit.
Yes.
And some users even went a step further,
Right.
arguing that, those examples highlight this bigger problem,
Right.
which is that older politicians might just be out of touch with the needs and priorities of younger generations.
That's a crucial point. This idea of intergenerational fairness
Yeah.
was a recurring theme.
Yeah.
We saw users arguing that older politicians are making decisions about a future that they won't personally experience.
Right.
Decisions on climate change,
Ah,
technology, economic systems, these are all issues that will disproportionately impact younger people.
right. It's like they're shaping a world that they won't even be a part of.
Exactly.
And one user, Simichi Sam,
Okay.
who's 82 years old, by the way,
Oh, wow.
really put it bluntly.
Okay.
They said anyone their age, still getting off on power, should be kept far away from the rest of us.
Wow. Samichi Sam's comment really struck a chord with a lot of the users.
Yeah.
And they also raised another point I think that deserves attention.
Okay.
They argued that cynicism and prejudice can actually intensify with age.
Mm-hmm.
And this could potentially influence the decisions that these politicians make.
That's a really thought-provoking perspective.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if there's a way to actually measure those factors.
Right.
Some users even suggested mandatory mental competency tests for politicians, no matter their age.
Mental competency tests were a popular suggestion.
Yeah.
It really highlights this desire for some kind of objective measures, to assess fitness for office.
Yeah.
However, a lot of users also expressed concerns about how such tests would be implemented
Right.
and whether they could truly be objective and free from political bias.
Right. It could become a political battleground
Exactly.
in and of itself.
Yeah.
But, it's clear that potential for cognitive decline is a real concern for a lot of people
Absolutely.
when it comes to political leadership.
Now, while some users are really advocating for these age limits,
Yeah.
others see them as problematic.
And their arguments are just as passionate, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What are the key points they're raising against imposing age restrictions?
Well, the main counterarguments we saw really centered around
Okay.
two things: the value of experience
Okay.
and the potential for age discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of users argued that age isn't a reliable indicator of competence.
Right.
They pointed out that there are plenty of younger politicians
Yeah.
who are just as ineffective or out of touch as their
Yeah.
older counterparts.
So age doesn't necessarily equal wisdom or effectiveness
Exactly.
in politics.
They're saying it's about the individual, not the number.
Mm-hmm.
And they really emphasize that voters should have the right to choose their representatives regardless of age.
Yeah.
They see age limits as a form of discrimination, plain and simple.
That makes sense. You can't just write off an entire generation
Right.
based on age.
They're arguing for individual assessment, not these blanket restrictions. And they also highlighted the success of older individuals in other fields
Yeah.
where experience is highly valued, like medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Their point is if a surgeon can be brilliant at 80, why not a politician?
And they had some great examples, too. One user mentioned Dr. James Andrews,
Oh, yes.
who's over 80 and still a top orthopedic surgeon,
Wow.
especially for professional athletes.
Dr. Andrews is a perfect example.
Yeah.
He demonstrates that age doesn't automatically equal decline.
Right.
And if, in fact, in some fields, experience is considered an invaluable asset.
So we have these two strong opposing viewpoints.
Yes.
On one hand, concerns about cognitive decline
Mm-hmm.
and generational disconnect.
Yes.
And on the other, the value of experience and concerns about age discrimination.
Right.
It feels like we're kind of at an impasse.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
Well, what's fascinating about this Reddit discussion is that it doesn't stop.
Okay.
At the simple yes or no of age limits,
Right.
users started exploring alternative solutions
Yeah.
to try to address these concerns, solutions that try to find a middle ground.
That's where things start to get really interesting.
Yes.
What kind of alternatives are they proposing?
One of the most frequent suggestions was term limits.
Okay.
And users debated, what the ideal length of those terms should be, and whether limiting someone's time in office would mean sacrificing too much valuable experience.
So finding that balance between fresh perspectives and institutional knowledge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But even term limits had their critics.
Oh,
Some argued that they could actually shift power away from elected officials and into the hands of unelected bureaucrats and lobbyists
interesting.
who wouldn't be subject to those same limits.
That almost sounds like it could make things worse.
Right.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this point, a user from Michigan shared their experience
Wow.
with term limits in their state.
Okay.
They argued that the constant turnover of lawmakers led to an increase in lobbyist influence because the inexperienced officials weren't really equipped to effectively challenge them.
So it seems like term limits might not be the perfect solution either.
Right.
There are potential downsides to consider.
Definitely. And that's what makes this whole conversation so important.
Yeah.
It forces us to think critically about the complexities of our political system and how to make it truly representative and responsive to the needs of all citizens,
Right.
regardless of their age.
It's a lot to unpack, but this is just the beginning of our deep dive, right?
Absolutely. We've just scratched the surface.
Okay.
There are even broader themes and alternative solutions that we need to explore.
So we've seen some pretty passionate arguments, both for and against age limits in politics.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of folks are kind of struggling to find that balance between respecting the experience of older politicians, but also making sure
Right.
that younger generations have a voice, in their future.
You've hit the nail on the head. It's definitely a complex issue
Yeah.
with valid points on both sides. And,
All right.
it's not just a U.S. problem either.
Right.
This debate is happening in democracies all around the world as societies are grappling with these changing demographics.
Right.
And the need to ensure that their political systems reflect the diversity of their citizens.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about finding the right age
Right.
for politicians,
Yeah.
but it's really about creating a system
Yes.
that is adaptable, resilient, truly representative of everyone.
Yes.
Which brings me to something I found really interesting
Okay.
in these Reddit discussions. The sheer number of alternative solutions people proposed. It seems like they're really trying to think outside the box on this one.
Absolutely. The Redditors were brimming with ideas that went beyond simply setting an arbitrary retirement age.
Okay.
Many argued that we should be focusing on these deeper systemic issues, things like campaign finance reform
Right.
and the undue influence of lobbyists.
Those are huge topics.
Yes.
How do those tie into this discussion about age and representation?
Well, some users argue that the current system, with its reliance on big money and these powerful special interests, makes it incredibly difficult for newcomers and younger candidates to break through.
Right.
They're up against these established politicians with vast resources and networks.
So even if we had no age limits, the same faces might stay in power simply because of how the system is set up.
That's the argument.
Wow.
They're saying it creates this uneven playing field that favors incumbents and those with deep pockets regardless of age.
Yeah.
And this can lead to a sense of stagnation and frustration,
Right.
which in turn fuels calls for things like term limits or age limit.
Because people just want to see some new blood.
Exactly.
Some fresh ideas.
Yes.
Regardless of where they come from.
Precisely. And some users even proposed more radical changes to our electoral system itself.
Okay.
Things like ranked choice voting or proportional representation,
Okay.
which could give more power to smaller parties and independent candidates.
I've heard those terms before, but can you kind of explain them for our listeners who might not be familiar?
Of course. So ranked choice voting allows voters to rank candidates in order of preference.
Okay.
If no candidate wins a majority, The candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and their votes are redistributed based on the voters' second choices.
Okay.
This continues until someone has a majority.
So it kind of avoids that whole runoff situation.
Exactly. It's meant to reduce the spoiler effect of third-party candidates
Okay.
and promote more diverse representation.
Interesting. And what about proportional representation?
So proportional representation allocates seats in a legislature based on the percentage of votes each party receives.
Okay.
So if a party wins 30% of the vote, they get roughly 30% of the seats.
Right.
This is in contrast to our current winner-take-all system,
Right.
which can lead to situations where a party wins a majority of seats,
Right.
even if they don't win a majority of the vote.
So these alternative systems are designed to break free from the limitations
Yes.
of the two-party system that dominates U.S. politics.
Precisely.
Oh.
They aim to create a system where more voices are heard and power is distributed more equitably. And what's particularly interesting is that these ideas weren't presented as replacements for the age limit debate.
Right.
They were part of a broader conversation about how to create a more responsive and representative government overall.
It's like they're saying, let's look at the bigger picture here.
Exactly.
If we're concerned about stagnation and a lack of fresh perspectives, maybe we need to rethink the entire system, not just focus on age as a single factor.
You got it. And that leads us to some even broader themes that emerged from this Reddit deep dive themes that go beyond specific policy proposals and really delve into the very heart of what it means to have a functioning democracy.
Okay, let's talk big picture then.
Okay.
What are those fundamental questions
All right.
that this whole debate about age limits in politics forces us to confront?
At its core, I think it boils down to this: who gets to represent us? And how do we ensure that those representatives are truly accountable to the people they serve?
It seems like a simple question, but the answer is far from simple.
You're absolutely right, because it forces us to grapple with these complex issues of power, legitimacy, and the very nature of leadership in a rapidly changing world. It makes us ask, what qualities are most important in a leader? Is it experience, wisdom, a deep understanding of history? Or is it the ability to adapt, innovate, and connect with the concerns of those who will inherit the future?
Yeah, it really feels like we're kind of at a crossroads here. We need leaders who can draw on the wisdom of the past, but also, embrace the challenges and opportunities of the future. It's a tall order.
It is. But I think these Reddit discussions show us that, people are hungry for this kind of conversation.
Right.
They're not shying away from these tough questions. They're engaging. They're passionate. And they're coming up with, innovative solutions.
And that's what I find so encouraging about these deep dives. It reminds us that people still care deeply about the future of democracy and are actively seeking ways to make it work better,
Absolutely.
for everyone. So after all this, what are the key takeaways do you think our listeners should be considering?
Well, I think first and foremost, this deep dive has demonstrated that there's no easy answer to this question of age and political leadership. It's not a simple matter of old versus young. It's a nuanced issue with valid points on both sides.
So while some people believe setting age limits is the solution, others are concerned about the potential for age discrimination and the loss of valuable experience.
Exactly. And I think the most important takeaway here is that we need to move beyond these simplistic solutions and engage in a more holistic conversation about what we want from our political system. What are the underlying factors that contribute to political stagnation? And how can we address those factors in a way that promotes, both experience and fresh perspectives?
So instead of just focusing on age as a single factor, maybe we should be looking at that bigger picture and considering things like campaign finance reform, lobbying influence, and even exploring alternative voting systems.
I think you're right on the money. This deep dive has really highlighted the fact that age is just one piece of the puzzle.
We need to be thinking about these systemic factors that shape our political landscape and considering, bold ideas for reform.
It's about creating a system that is truly representative and responsive to the needs of all citizens, regardless of their age. So as a final thought for our listeners, if age limits aren't the answer, what structural changes could we envision
Mm,
that would make our democracy more vibrant, adaptable, and truly representative?
that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's one that I hope this deep dive will inspire our listeners to ponder.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the future of our democracy depends on our collective willingness
Mm-hmm.
to engage in these difficult conversations and to work towards building a system that truly serves the needs of all.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains churning.